Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Corey Perkins here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 9 of What If Izuku was the host of the Blacklight virus. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. And so, we begin. The faint inhale and exhale of the mastermind of evil's breathing apparatus echoed inside the underground chamber. The dimly lit room, although large, felt snug for the aura of the two individuals exuding from their frames. The form of the tailored villain was lit up by the static green of a large monitor behind him. The two evildoers came across from one another, this snickering smile still plastered on their faces. In an instant, a burst of pressurized air shot toward the boy, shooting through the room as the lights flickered. Upon impact, a large amount of dust was lifted and the swinging lights above exploded, sending shards of glass around the room. Red lights began to shine around every corner of the room, lighting up the chamber in their crimson embrace. Where Midoriya had been impacted, now knelt an armor-clad figure, red vein-like growths covering the body emanating a frightful glow. Slowly getting to its feet, the figure cracked its neck as large spikes began to grow from its back.
Good, Mr. Shigaraki. That's what I expected from the King of Evil.
All for One felt a slight shiver run down his spine as he flexed his now enlarged right arm that had become inhuman. The quirk amalgamated arm of the master of villainy flexed as he prepared himself for a follow-up attack. Deciding to strike first, the fine-suited man dug his heels into the ground and blasted himself forward, meeting the young man with all of his might. Crouching down, the helmet reformed around the boy's face as he forced his body forward with his bladed hands bared to strike down the old guard. The large fist impacted the biomatter armor in the chest, creating ripples in the suit. Believing the impact to be devastating, the man grinned only to grit his teeth tightly as the teen's bladed fingers penetrated his arm. Using the momentum of the impact, Midoriya dug his heels into the ground and promptly lifted the massive arm, throwing both it and its wielder at impossible speeds towards the wall behind them in a suplex-like maneuver. The black-masked man shot through the steel wall and broke through several machinery that exploded upon impact. Following the explosion, the entire hideout began to shake and threatened to cave in upon them. In response to the instability of the facility, a massive burst of air broke through the ceiling from which All for One quickly escaped through.
Running away, old man? Not on my watch!
Shouted the teen as his voice echoed through the ignited facility, traveling upward through the tunnel created by All for One. When the black-suited man made his exit from the underground, he steadied himself looking around at his surroundings.
Ha! Took you long enough!
Turning around, the man's face was met with a devastating impact of Midoriya's right fist. Though instead of being sent flying or having his jaw break from the pressure, one of his many quirks activated, blowing the greenette back and soaring it into the building. As the boy went through the building's supports, the above floors began to cave and the structure itself caused it to collapse. From the massive amounts of dust and debris shot a piercing black tentacle that stretched across the wreckage, but was deflected by a fan of flames that protected the symbol of evil. The rubble from the collapsed building was blasted in different directions as the bio-warrior pounced toward his target. The fan of flames opened, allowing the massive deformed fist of All for One to lunge toward the incoming greenette. The two's fists clashed, sending immense shockwaves around them, causing windows to shatter, sending glass in every direction. Whilst clashing, the muscles on the arm of the villain coiled, and with the addition of his air cannon quirk shot back a secondary burst of power, forcing the armored teen back. As the impossibly strong air burst pushed the boy back, he shot one of his tentacles into the ground, anchoring him down. Using the momentum, the boy swung in a circular motion and managed to land a devastating dropkick to the side of the villain's head, sending him soaring. The impact dragged the suited man through the ground, fissuring it until he met the base of another building. That impact causing said building to fall over on him. In a flash, the entire structure was blasted apart, and there stood strong the blind villain, his suit now torn to shreds, and along with his right arm, his left arm became massive and deformed.
Resilient! I love it! Finally a challenge! No more holding back!
Shouted Izuku, his face exposed through the armor showing a massive bloodthirsty grin with red eyes. Balling up his fist, the boy began concentrating energy into him as he brought his fist to his chest and began hunching over until he jumped into the air, outstretched his arms, and sent a shockwave of energy in all directions. As the wave crossed the area, All for One again summoned a wall of flames to guard, but after a few seconds, it shattered and pushed him back. Taking the opportunity to strike, Midoriya rushed toward the hurt villain, his armored fists suddenly enlarged into giant spiked clubs, which connected into a flurry of fists that sent the man into a small crater in the ground. With every punch, the crater expanded, and even though the blowback of the villain's recoil quirk and layers of flames became between the strikes, the blows still connected. Lifting his arms into the air, the biomatter-covered clubs suddenly melded together into one large hammer-like fist. Though before he could land a finishing blow, the deformed arms of All For One suddenly split into two more pairs and hit a flurry of strikes, sending the greenette into the air. Floating into the air, All For One continued sending strikes toward the boy, sending him skyward. After landing a final combination using his telekinesis, the suited man picked up a large piece of rubble and shot them toward the boy.
You will never defeat me, child! I am All For One! I will not be defeated by a worm such as yourself!
While the masked villain gloated about his apparent superiority, the green-haired biodemon seemed to be encased in stone as he was being shot into the distance. Then in a flash, the rubble stone and steel burst open, while black tendrils shot in every direction along with another wave of energy. Shooting down to the ground, Midoriya's fist impacted, causing the ground to crater around him.
Enough talk! Time for action!
The boy began to chuckle lightly until it transitioned into a full hysterical laugh which disturbed the hovering villain. A pool of black biomatter began to expand from below the teen, and from the dark substance rose dozens among dozens of monstrosities. Then, as the mindless viral army began populating the area, the ground itself began to shake violently. Buildings began to swing and crumble from the extreme quake, until gargantuan clawed tentacles began exploding from the ground below, as several Hydra creatures had been summoned to the battlefield. The masked villain's sensory quirks began going haywire, as he was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of adversaries that began encroaching on his position. One thought was screaming in his mind for the first time. Run. In an act of what could only be considered desperation, All For One attempted to use his telekinesis to fly out of the area, but was stopped by a black tendril that had wrapped around his ankle. Upon noticing this, he turned around to release the hold, but another tendril grabbed hold of his other leg. Instinctively, the villain attempted to use his flame fan to sever the tendrils, but they seemed to be unfazed. Panicking, the man used his psychic powers to launch debris toward the host of the virus, but was met by either a Hydra tentacle or a large Goliath protecting their master. The grip around his ankles suddenly multiplied tenfold as he was forcefully dragged down to earth. Slamming into the ground, the horde of the infected began attacking the man, sharp teeth and claws digging into his deformed arms and severing muscles and tendons. For the first time in his life, All For One was truly helpless, his screams of pain reverberating through the area. After the many viral creatures had eaten their fill, the man formerly known as the symbol of evil was left with only a head and torso. The scarlet life essence of the ancient villain sprayed and pulled around the still breathing man's body as the horde began to pull away as their master approached. Kneeling down to look at the crippled villain, Midoriya's helmet retracted into his armor, showing his sadistic grin. His right hand turned into a large blade as he plunged it deep into the still beating heart of the villain, once known as All For One.
I win,
whispered the boy wickedly, as the fallen villain began to be covered in biomatter which soon bonded with him, supercharging his cells. His eyes glowed brightly enough to fill an entire destroyed cityscape around them. The hundreds of years of villainy, the plots and schemes of the King of Evil melding with his own ambitions. Though before the merge could complete, an interesting plot came to light. Within a white void stood a black-suited villain, his former bald head now filled with white locks, with his eyes returned to him in their signature yellow. Adjusting his shirt collar, the man smirked as he began walking into the void. It seems my failsafe was successful. My body may be no more, but this may be for the best.
Are you sure about that, Mr. Shigaraki?
Said a familiar voice that sent chills down the spine of the white-haired villain. Turning around, he bore witness to the green-haired boy sitting with his legs crossed upon a black throne. A smile set on his face as the many individuals that had been wronged or tricked by the villain began appearing from nothingness. A boy with cloud-like hair, another with dry skin and hands attached to his face, and the many vestiges of the hundreds of quirks he'd stolen in the past.
No, 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 no. Impossible! That's impossible!
In that moment, the hundreds of vestiges pounced on the man and began cannibalizing him, as Midoriya smiled widely, and his demonic red eyes illuminated the void. Upon the death and consumption of All for One, the criminal empire of the King of Evil had crumbled to pieces. Facilities were abandoned due to the lack of leadership, bringing unbridled chaos within villain society. This video is sponsored by Adobe. Adobe is redefining the digital experience through game-changing innovations that shape the next generation of storytelling. Adobe makes it easy to create, edit, and share digital documents securely, allowing you to collaborate and communicate across devices. Adobe Photoshop is your go-to application for faster graphics editing and digital art as a whole. At We the Celestials, all our thumbnails across every channel are created with Adobe Photoshop. Adobe Premiere Pro is a timeline-based and non-linear video editing software application that is versatile and easy for beginning and master editors. Finally, Adobe After Effects is the industry-standard tool for digital visual effects, motion graphics, and composting applications used in post-production. Many of our voice actors, audio editors, and video editors use Premiere Pro and After Effects to produce these high-quality videos. Click the link in the description to start creating now. And thank you, Adobe, for sponsoring this video. Within the confines of the heavily fortified Hero Public Safety Commission's building, an emergency meeting was being held with the survival of the country at stake. An older woman with swept-back hair sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped together with perturbed expression firmly planted on her face. As you all know, pro-hero Sir Night-Eye had given us a prophecy of the impending collapse of our country, and it seems that said prophecy is coming to fruition. I believe it's time we reach out to our internal contacts for assistance. The decision seemed unanimous, as the entirety of the board of directors nodded in agreement. The lady director looked toward her assistant and stood at her side and gestured for them to proceed with starting communications. Moments later, a screen on the wall turned on and showed the U.S. President's seal as the call connected. Mr. President, thank you for taking our call in these trying times. While the board of directors spoke to their allies in a last-ditch effort to save the country, a hooded boy stood in front of the gates at the Public Hero Safety Commission building. Two armed guards stood firm at the gates as they began aiming their rifles toward the young man as he approached. "Hello, boys. Daddy's home." With a smirk on his face, the young man raised his hands, which signaled two four-legged beasts to attack from opposite directions. Before they got the opportunity to react, the beast had quickly pounced and began ripping into the two men. With a sickly smile, the boy slid his hands into his jacket pockets and walked past the gates. Similar to UA, the gates held a bioscanner that could instantly detect the infection. And just like in the school, the lights shined red and alarms blared through the building. The young man kept his head down as he continued approaching the building's main door. Steel walls began sealing the building off, all windows and doors beginning to shutter. Various turrets that had been hidden from sight emerged and set their aim on the hooded teen. Before bullets began to rain on the teen, large beastly mutants ripped the weapons off their hinges and turned them to scrap metal. Before the heavy steel doors finished their downward swing, the boy with one hand grabbed the slab of metal and stopped it in place. The gears and springs that attempted to lock down the building began to creak loudly as smoke and sparks began fuming out of the mechanism. His arm turned into a biomatter gauntlet, and in one swift motion, the entire door was ripped off from the entire structure. With a cold smile, the boy snapped his fingers as a horde of infected began crowding around him, their bloodlust apparent in their every action. "Time for dinner!" On command, the entire army of ungodly monstrosities entered the building as the sounds of gunshots and screams echoed through the lobby. The young man looked above to a CCTV camera that was aimed in his direction. Smiling towards the feed, the boy's eyes glowed red before the camera was crushed by a telekinetic force. The hooded youth calmly passed through the blood-stained lobby as his inhuman monstrosities tore apart the staff of the Hero Commission. The screams began to deafen as the red-eyed boy knelt down and grabbed a keycard from the corpse of a fallen security guard. Then he proceeded to enter an open elevator. Sliding the card into a small slit, the teen selected the final floor, which led to his final destination. The soothing sound of smooth jazz on the small speakers above him led the teen to lightly tap his foot along with the surrounding beat. "I have to admit one thing. They do have a decent taste in music," mumbled the boy as the doors opened to the executive floor. Bullets began to spray against the young man's body, but instantly ricocheted back to the armed guards, which caused the well-suited individual in the vicinity to scream and duck for cover. Within the conference room, the board of directors huddled together in the back of the room as their security forces aimed their rifles at the entrance to the room. The screams silenced for several seconds as slow, heavy footsteps echoed within the floor. Before the gunmen could fire back, black tendrils pierced their skulls, snuffing out their lives in a split second. From the chaos emerged the young man as he slowly pulled back his hood and set his sights on the president of the commission. "Madam President, we meet at last," said Midoriya, as he bowed in a mocking show of respect to the stoic woman at the end of the room. The board members remained silent behind their chosen representative, fear emanating from their very being. "Oh, no need to respond. There's no use in speaking to a boy you planned on killing, is there? I know everything. You planned on using me to take care of your virus problem, and once your precious Japan was sterilized, you planned on ending me. Don't try to deny it. It won't save you." Snapping his fingers, the two corpses of the impaled guards began to regenerate before mutating into a mindless beast. The two then pounced toward the cowering board members that began to scatter about, attempting to jump through the windows in desperation. While some did jump through the glass, those were the few who were dealt a quick, painless death as they hit the pavement. The others were not as lucky. The suited woman sat quietly in the corner as she seemed to accept her fate, while Agent Zero approached with a vindictive grin. "Project Omega. That's what you people named me. Fitting. For I am the end, Madam President." Midoriya's eyes glowed bright red as he grabbed the woman's face and nearly instantly absorbed her into his being and assimilated her memories. Once the decades of life experience melded with the boy, a smile formed on his face as the former Public Safety Hero Commission's plots had become clear. "Time to end this game and take what's rightfully mine. I'm coming for you, one for all." Back at UA, both the staff and student body had been preparing for the day that had been foretold by the clairvoyant hero. Bakugo and Todoroki were training intensely within the walls of the schools as their classmates joined in to strengthen their forces, while All Might stood against a wall observing the growth of his disciples. "We had to return for final preparations. I hope we can... No, stop. Stop, Toshinori. This is not the time or place. You are the symbol of peace. If you don't keep faith..." All Might's thoughts were cut short as Sir Night-Eye walked into the training hall, his face pale while gripping his phone tightly. After a moment of silence and clearing his throat, the green-haired man finally spoke. "The Public Safety Hero Commission has fallen. It's time." The man's voice echoed within the room as the students stopped dead in their tracks upon hearing the news. The gravity quirk user Ochako Uraraka fell to her knees in tears, while the rest felt sense of existential dread, even greater than what was felt after the USJ.
Oi, who told you extras to stop? No way are we going to lose to this overgrown cold flu. Plus, freaking ultra, you wannabes!
The righteous anger and motivation from the explosive teen snapped the teens out of their frozen state, as they were filled with the new fire to fuel their ambitions. Though immediately after, Bakugo pointed at the two pro heroes before shouting confidently,
"Hey, old man! When we reach that green-haired bastard, he's mine! You got that? That goes for you too, icy hot bastard!"
concluded the ashen-haired boy as he locked eyes with the biochromatic teen, who simply responded with a grin that was quickly reciprocated. The final stand for Japan has finally arrived, and the hopes of this nearly crumbled nation rests on the shoulders of the next generation. The disciples of Japan's greatest hero now held the key to not only survival, but victory. Will the heroes finally stop the endless hordes, or will darkness envelop them? Find out next time in the exciting conclusion of what if Izuku was the host of the Blacklight virus. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that we the Celestials have many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below in the description, so feel free to check it out and all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in this production of today's awesome content. Their details are in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye and have a divine day.